And welcome to the event, Delivering Energy Efficient and Climate-Friendly Cooling Through National Cooling Action Plans. The event is hosted today by UN Environment Program Cool Coalition and UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific in collaboration with UN Development Program, Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, and UN Environment Program Ozone Action. My name is Lily Riahi. I'm the coordinator for the Cool Coalition at UNEP, and I will be your moderator today. So throughout the next 4 hours, we can go to the agenda, we will exchange on experiences and best practices with several country pioneers and experts who've developed national cooling, some of the first national cooling action plans in the region and worldwide. We will discuss how we can collectively scale ambition and action on cooling in this region to deliver on the Paris Agreement, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And I must say, it is great to see such an interest in this topic in Asia-Pacific region and beyond. I understand we have with us today up to 400 participants registered, including 70 countries which are in the Asia-Pacific region and beyond. To get us started, we will hear some scene-setting welcome remarks from UN NCAP and from UN Environment Program, followed by keynotes from the Ozone Secretariat and India's Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, as you can see on the screen. Following the keynotes, Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy and Sustainable Energy for All will present an overview of the National Cooling Action Plan methodology that is being launched today. And we will then, following this presentation, have 2 breakout groups, which you should have registered to when you signed up through the registration link. We will have one that will be between countries exchanging on the NCAP development process, and a second breakout group, which will be focused on more data collection and assessment process for NCAP. Following the breakouts, we will have a presentation from UNEP Ozone Action as well as from UNDP on linkages between national cooling action plans and HFC phase out and phase down, as well as national climate strategy. And we will finish with a panel discussion on financing NCAPs and financing NCAP implementation. As you see, there is a Q&A, and there will also be discussions in the breakout sessions. Please write your questions in the chat. Some questions might be answered directly in the chat, and I will also take a few during Q&A sessions that we have on the agenda. So now we'd like to request all of you in the audience to please feel free to turn on your videos, but kindly stay muted. It is nice to have an audience to speak to. To get us started, I would like to hand over the floor to Mr. Hongpeng Liu, Director of Energy Division at NCAP, as well as Ms. Dechen Sering, Director, Asia and Pacific Office of United Nations Environment Program, to give us some welcome remarks. Hongpeng and Dechen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lily. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the official launch of National Cooling Action Plans, Methodology and the Regional Capacity Building Workshop for Asia and Pacific, delivering energy efficiency and climate-friendly cooling through national cooling action plans. Cooling is essential for both human well-being and economic prosperity. However, it comes at a cost to the environment. Refrigeration and air conditioning accounts for 7 to 10% of global CO2 emissions due to energy use and the leaks of hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants. It is estimated that the global energy demand for air conditioning will experience a 33-fold increase during the 21st century, with most of this growth coming from developing countries. In Southeast Asia alone, cooling is expected to be the fastest growing electricity consumption sector over the next 2 decades, which will not only raise the overall electricity demand, but also increase the strain on power grid. Offsetting the demand for cooling with efficient and low carbon solutions is crucial for achievement of SDGs especially SDG 7 and the Paris Agreement. Space cooling is not a luxury, but a necessity for people to cope with high temperatures and humidity. Efficient and climate-friendly cooling is crucial for ensuring thermal comfort, occupational health, safety, and productivity. It is closely linked to the quality of education too, as studies show that cognitive performance of pupils reduces considerably when temperatures in classroom are not managed well. Managing thermal comfort and minimizing exposure to heat stress is particularly important. With more than half of the region's population living in cities, often challenged by urban heat island effect and air pollution. Efficient and climate-friendly urban cooling is a key challenge for ensuring cities in Asia and the Pacific are safe, resilient, and sustainable. Reliable cooling is also crucial for cold chains that are vital for the safe supply and the transportation of food, vaccines, and other medicines. About half of the food is lost post-harvest in developing countries, with 90% of food wastage occurring in the supply chain. Sustainable cold chain would reduce food losses, boost farmers' income, make food more affordable, as well as increase the quality of food reaching the market. Moreover, the World Health Organization estimates that nearly half of freeze, dried, and a quarter of liquid vaccines are wasted each year preliminarily due to the issues with the cold chains. Lack of access to adequate cold chains for COVID-19 vaccines is one of the most immediate and prominent concerns of the world is facing right now. So ladies and gentlemen, it's evident that all countries have to act now and incorporate sustainable and efficient cooling strategies into their national policies. This requires an in-depth understanding of the national context, which cannot be achieved without a strong collaboration of stakeholders at international, regional, national, and local level. So NCAP has joined forces with the UNEP within the framework of Cool Coalition to assist member states in developing national cooling action plans with emphasis on energy efficiency for sustainable development and sustainable cooling especially. NCAP is pleased to be a member of Cool Coalition's steering committee, building upon tremendous collective expertise of Cool Coalition's partners. NCAP and the UNEP Cool Coalition have developed the first comprehensive methodology for the National Cooling Action Plan. It has been expected as a key strategic document to drive sustainable cooling transition at the national level. Please allow me to express my sincere appreciations to all of the partners of the Cool Coalition who contributed to the development of this methodology, to the government of Cambodia, particularly the Ministry of Environment, and the government of Indonesia through the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources for their effective collaboration with the NCAP, UNEP, and the Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy on piloting this methodology in their respective countries and working tirelessly to develop their national cooling action plan. I look forward to the implementation of the comprehensive approach to sustainable cooling in other countries throughout Asia and Pacific and beyond. NCAP will be collaborating closely with other regional commissions and relevant stakeholders to further building capacity for the development of the National Cooling Action Plan. I thank you for your participation and wish you a successful deliberation. So now I'd like to invite Ms. Daichen Terry, Director, Asia and Pacific Office, UNEP, to deliver her opening remarks. Daichen, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hongpen. Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, let me begin by thanking you all for coming here. Thank you to NCAP and the UNEP-led Cool Coalition and our collaborators, UNDP, Ozone Action, KSAP, for bringing us here today to discuss a crucial and a missing piece in the climate action, energy, and sustainable development puzzle. I'm of course speaking about efficient climate-friendly cooling. As you've heard from Mr. Hongpen Liu, to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, we must expand access to cooling. When we look at present approaches that contribute to climate change, it causes almost 10% of greenhouse gases. And we need to put this in perspective. This is twice the emissions from aviation and maritime transport combined. This is even more alarming as we're heading for a temperature rise of 3 degrees centigrade this century, according to the UNEP emissions gap report. And yesterday, when we talked to ICIMO, this is International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, they said if we had 1.5 degrees centigrade rise, it would mean a third of all the glaciers in the Himalayas melting. So when we start to think, we know we have a Paris Agreement goal of pursuing 1.5 degrees centigrade. So we need to act quickly and boldly to break the vicious cycle of cooling and warming. To solve this dilemma, we need a rapid transition to climate-friendly, energy-efficient cooling. So how do we go about this transition? Ladies and gentlemen, we need to think comprehensively. Contrary to some expectations, a shift to clean energy alone can't do it all. We have to give the context. The last few years have been record-breaking years for solar energy, but demand for new air conditioning units offset all the new capacity. So we need to think about smart buildings, urban design, and nature-based solutions, super efficient equipment and appliances, and a shift to lower global warming potential refrigerants. If we look at cities, and Hongpeng's already talked about heat island effect, which raises temperatures. So we need to transform concrete cities into urban forests, create green roofs, walls in buildings, increase tree canopy cover to keep our cities cooler sustainably and make them more livable. In cities ranging from Dhaka to Hanoi, we've looked at urban greening projects that have brought temperatures down by almost 2 degrees centigrade. The emission mitigation opportunity of taking comprehensive action in the cooling center is of incredible magnitude. Last year's cooling synthesis report demonstrated that if we combine energy efficiency, refrigerant improvements, and cooling, we can avoid an equivalent of 4 to 8 years of total annual greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So we need to get to net zero cooling to reduce the costs of the energy transition. This can bring, we're looking at figures of about $3.5 trillion by 2030. Distinguished guests, national cooling action plans are a powerful tool for countries to take a comprehensive approach to accelerate action on the ground. Countries can develop national cooling action plans to deliver efficient and sustainable cooling and bring essential life-preserving services like vaccines, safe food to all people while driving climate action, as said by the UN Secretary-General, Mr. António Guterres. And in this make it or break it year for climate action, countries have the opportunity of anchoring efficient, climate-friendly cooling measures identified in the National Cooling Action Plans and long-term climate strategies and the nationally determined contributions. So the National Cooling Action Plans create a framework for a much-needed cross-sectoral collaboration to deliver on the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. As you will hear, champion countries in the region have developed national cooling action plans to coordinate energy efficiency and the refrigerant phase down, identify comprehensive measures to meet cooling needs, accelerate the transition to sustainable cooling. Ladies and gentlemen, making this transition happen is the objective of the Cool Coalition, a joint effort of over 110 governments, cities, businesses, development organizations, and civil society groups that support countries and industry take comprehensive action to tackle growing cooling demand while contributing to the Paris Agreement, the Montreal Protocol, and the Agenda 2030. A transformative initiative of the Climate Action Summit, the UNEP-led Cool Coalition brought together several national cooling action pioneers. It also brought together institutions like UNEP, UNDP, KSAP, Alliance for Energy Efficiency Economy to develop a National Cooling Action Plan methodology in partnership with UN NCAP. India, and I'm very happy to see my colleague, Mr. Jagmeet Thakpa, was a major source of inspiration for this methodology because of the comprehensive approach and coverage of all sectors, and we look forward to hearing about the experience today. Getting cooling right offers a 3-in-1 opportunity to cut global warming, improve the lives of hundreds of millions of people, and realize huge financial savings. The Cool Coalition is a powerful collective force for bringing these and many other benefits to fruition, and we've proved it since the Climate Action Summit. So I hope many of you will join us to help keep the planet cool. Together, we can make a difference for the people and the planet. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dachin and Hongpeng, for the welcome remarks, the inspiring welcome remarks. I would like to now invite Megumi Sakif, Executive Secretary of the Ozone Secretariat, to deliver her keynote remarks on linking NCAPs with the Montreal Protocol. Meg, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lily. Mr. Hongpeng Liu of NCAP, Ms. Dechen of UNEP, cool greetings to everyone from Nairobi, where it is actually quite cold. Thank you very much for the UNEP Cool Coalition for the invitation to the Ozone Secretariat to participate. In the background note to this workshop, there is a reference to the 2019 World Ozone Day. On that day, the UN Secretary-General called upon countries to develop national cooling action plans. For this year's Ozone Day, our theme is Montreal Protocol keeping us, our food and vaccines cool. We chose this theme because we wanted to highlight the links among the Montreal Protocol and its Kigali Amendment, climate change and cooling, as Secretary-General did in 2019. Ozone-depleting substances, or ODSs, controlled by the Montreal Protocol are powerful greenhouse gases. It has been estimated that the Montreal Protocol avoided about 135 billion tons of CO2 equivalent emissions of ODSs in the 10-year period from 1990 to 2010 alone. This is 5 times larger than the annual emissions reduction target for the first commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, the predecessor to the Paris Agreement on climate change. The Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol phases down HFCs, which are non-ozone depleting but highly global warming. And these are largely used in cooling sector as refrigerants. The Kigali Amendment entered into force on the 1st of January 2019, and 122 parties have ratified it so far. If the amendment is universally ratified and fully implemented, it is estimated that HFC phase down alone could avoid up to 0.4 degrees centigrade of warming by 2100. If energy efficiency improvements are made in refrigeration and air conditioning equipment while phasing down HFCs, climate benefits may even double. National Cooling Action Plans is the main focus of this workshop. Since the launch of the first NCAP in 2019 by India, many other countries around the world have developed their NCAPs. I understand that in the Asia and the Pacific region, China, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam have developed their NCAPs, and Cambodia and Indonesia are in the process of doing so. Congratulations to these countries for their efforts and for the leadership. Montreal Protocol's Technical and Economic Assessment Panel, or TEEP, included NCAP among the best practices related to phasing down high GWP refrigerants and increasing energy efficiency in the refrigeration and air conditioning sector as a mechanism to coordinate national strategies around energy, climate, and ozone action. Based on the experience of countries that have already gone through the process of developing NCAPs, multiple benefits have been identified by the TEEP. The most obvious one is that these plans can provide a mechanism for interagency coordination and a collaboration framework for multiple stakeholder engagement at the national level. This results in turn in a broad and coherent national framework for continuous promotion of low GWP technologies and improvement in energy efficiency, thus helping governments with the support of all relevant stakeholders to meet their commitments under the Montreal Protocol, the Kigali Amendment, and the Paris Agreement all at the same time. During the last 5 years, technology has developed rapidly. Higher energy efficiency and lower GWP equipment are now available for most market sectors in the cooling sector, and these technologies are increasingly accessible worldwide. Coupled with the right regulatory and financial environment, effective and sustainable cooling can be achieved to contribute not only to climate change mitigation, but also to several sustainable development goals. For example, sustainable cooling improves public health and protects the vulnerable populations by preserving vaccines and food for safe use and consumption. Also, productivity and health of workforces can also be improved through provision of thermal comfort at workplaces. And these, of course, have already been mentioned by Mr. Liu and Dechen. Now, I would like to congratulate the Cooling Coalition, UNEP SCAP, and the various partners for developing the NCAP methodology for effective and comprehensive cooling solutions, which will help countries meet the rising demand for cooling without warming our planet. Congratulations once again to countries that have developed their NCAP or are in the process of doing so. And those countries are all parties to the Montreal Protocol, and all but one are parties to the Kigali Amendment as well. Their experience helped to inform and strengthen the methodology of NCAP. We hope that many more parties will join too. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very successful and fruitful workshop. Thank you. Back to you, Lily.
Thank you very much, Meg. I would like to now turn to Mr. Jigmeet Thakpa, Joint Secretary from the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of India, to share some of the best practices from the World Allotted National Cooling Action Plan of India. Mr. Thakpa, the floor is yours. You are on mute. If you could unmute yourself, please.
Today's webinar, and Your Excellency Hong Peng Liu, Director, Energy Division, UN SCAP, Ms. Dechen Sering, Director, Asia Pacific, UNEP, Ms. Megumi Seki, Executive Secretary, Ozone Secretariat, Dr. Satish Kumar, President of the Executive Director of Alliance for Energy Efficiency and Economy, AEEE, distinguished panelists, and participants, accept my greetings from India on today's occasion. I thank UNEP for inviting me to participate in the launch of National Cooling Action Plan methodologies and series of regional capacity building and share my thought on this very important initiative of India, India's Cooling Action Plan, developed by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India. As most of you may be aware, that India is among the first countries in the world to launch a comprehensive cooling action plan, which has a long-term vision to address cooling requirement across various sectors. Linkages of cooling with sustainable goals, SDGs, is well acknowledged. The cross-sectoral nature of cooling and its use in development of economy makes provision for cooling an important development necessity. Additionally, cooling-related activity are one of the major sectors for employment both in urban and rural areas. It is widely known fact that about 90% of the total emission from refrigeration and air conditioning equipment is because of energy consumption. The Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol for the first time has recognized linkages between the maintaining and enhancing energy efficiency of refrigeration and air conditioning equipment with refrigerant transition under the Montreal Protocol. Keeping in view that energy efficiency is a major driver of technology choice and considering the need for an integrated view to be taken with respect to cooling for maximization of climate benefit under Kigali Amendment, Government of India has developed the India Cooling Action Plan to integrate issue of energy efficiency, refrigerant transition, technology choice, reduction of cooling load, focus on service sector, and having an innovation ecosystem for development of low global warming potential alternatives. Indian Cooling Action Plan aims to provide 20 years prospective plan and policy recommendation to address the cooling requirement across sectors while providing for ways and means to provide thermal comfort and access to sustainable cooling to all, involving multi-stakeholders to synergize action for addressing cooling demand across all sectors. That is technology, manufacturing, energy efficiency, and the environment, while re-emphasizing the principle of enshrined in the country's program of India for phase out ozone depleting substance, which is to have maximum economic dislocation and obsolescence cost and maximize indigenous production to twin environment and economic gains. In 2017, approximately 272 million households were estimated in India, and which will increase to 328 in 2027 and 386 million in 2037 respectively. The commercial sector's floor area is expected to grow around 1.5 to 2 times in the next decade and 2.5 to 3 times by 2037-38. The aggregate national cooling demand in tonnage refrigeration is projected to grow by 8 times by 2037-38 as compared to 2017-2018 baseline, out of which building sector cooling demand shows a significant growth at nearly 11 times. A tonnage reduction potential of around 13%, which translates to 9 million TR, could be achieved by 2027-28, and around 23%, which translates to 32 million TR by 2037-38, could be realized through more rigorous implementation of ECBC in upcoming commercial building in the country. Development of Indian Cooling Action Plan has been a multi-stakeholder, inclusive processes encompassing different government ministries, department, organization, industry and industry association, think tank, academia, and R&D institutions. The Indian Cooling Action Plan recommends synergy with ongoing government programs and schemes in order to maximize socio-economic co-benefit. Synergetic action with respect to cooling across sector will have a higher impact than action taken in isolation. So the goal set as per the Indian Cooling Action Plan are first to reduce cooling demand by across all the sector by 20 to 25% by 2037 to 2038. Secondly, to reduce refrigerant demand by 25% to 30% by 2037-38. And third, to reduce cooling energy requirement by 25. You're able to see?
Yes, we can see now.
Oh,
that's great.
Great, yeah. Fourthly, to recognize cooling and related areas as the third area for research, and to train about 100,000 service sector technicians, synergizing with Skill India mission. But it is not working. Anyway,
just please let me know when you need to change.
Yeah. So I'm coming to the last slide. Anyway, Indian Cooling Action Plan has been, an important policy initiative of the government of India, which has a potential to provide socio-economic and environmental benefit related to reduce refrigerant use, climate mitigation, sustainable development goals, and many countries are now involved in developing cooling action plans. United Nations Secretary-General has highlighted the need for all the countries to develop national cooling action plan. This step taken by India is of important policy initiative which can help in climate action and achieving sustainable development goal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Takpa, for that very detailed picture of your best practice in India. And sorry for the technical difficulties. So now we would like to turn over to Dr. Satish, President and Executive Director of Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy, as well as Sneha Sasher, Strategic Advisor at AEEE, to present an overview of the NCAP methodology, which actually took quite some inspiration from India's best practice, Mr. Takpa. So Satish and Sneha, over to you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Okay, terrific. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to honorable and distinguished guests and fellow speakers and panelists. I want to thank His Excellency Mr. Hongpeng Liu of NCAP Ms. Deshan Sering of UNEP, Ms. Meg Saki of UNEP Secretariat, and Mr. Jigmet Tappa for Government of India for setting the context on the launch of the NCAP methodology. So just an aside that unlike Nairobi, we in New Delhi, where Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy is based, is sweltering. And not only New Delhi is sweltering, which is expected in June, but we are also seeing record warming in Pacific Northwest in the US and Canadian province of British Columbia, where temperatures were higher on 1 or 2 days, I think the last week than New Delhi. And that is completely, I think, crazy. People are talking about once in 1,000 years kind of a phenomena. So the importance of thermal comfort and cooling cannot be overemphasized. Next slide, please. Sorry, I think there was, I think we are using a slide older, but I just want to acknowledge the contributions that other speakers have also mentioned, that AEEE under the aegis of the Cool Coalition, UN NCAP and KSEP has been involved in developing this global NCAP methodology that can help national government conduct a holistic assessment of their country's current and projected cooling demand and develop national cooling action plans. The Cool Coalition Secretariat has also set up a National Cooling Action Plan working group comprising of SE for All, UNDP, United for Efficiency, UNEP, World Bank, Energy Foundation China, CLASP, University of Birmingham, and UNIDO to draw upon the shared experience and working knowledge of developing NCAPs from different countries. And I think I cannot overemphasize the importance of this collaborative process because the experience, the cumulative experience that all these organizations bring to the table in terms of the experience as well as the skill set while developing various national cooling action plans has played an absolutely critical role in the development of this NCAP methodology that is getting launched today. Next slide, please. So it is my distinct pleasure and honor to be talking about the NCAP methodology and the cooling demand assessment along with my colleague, Ms. Neha Sachar, in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So just at a very high level, I think the National Cooling Action Plan, which is the theme of this workshop, this is pretty important to highlight that what is the purpose and how national cooling action plans can be derived. And if they are done in a proper manner, they can drive alignment by establishing a strong political will and meaningful nationwide directives, as Mr. Takpa just talked about how India has done it. There is also a strong possibility for leveraging interlinkages with other government agencies and setting direction and actionable targets for addressing access to cooling while addressing the environmentally harmful impacts and maximizing the socio-economic benefits. Next slide, please. So what are some of the foundational principles that the NCAP methodology that is getting launched is encompassing? And I would like to touch upon two critical aspects. One of them is the focus on adaptability. And while the methodology is providing high-level guidance, the development team has to exercise high level of discretion and flexibility to meet the country's unique context and needs. And I'm going to talk about what I specifically mean in the next couple of slides. A few others, such as the political and manufacturing climate, availability of data, local capacity, etc., must also be understood by the development team and the national entities responsible for developing the NCAP in a particular country. Next slide, please. So what is the process that has been followed when we are talking about this NCAP methodology, and why an integrated approach to addressing cooling becomes so critical? So the first aspect when we are talking about developing a national cooling action plan in the country's context is to reduce cooling loads, and I think in this aspect is extremely important, especially in the tropical country where the weather and climate can actually impose a high degree of stress, whether we are talking about our buildings, whether we are talking about our cold chain, which helps move our fruits and vegetables or our meats and vaccines, I think, throughout the country. So thermal efficient building design and construction and passive cooling practices in case of building sector becomes absolute of paramount importance. Secondly, after we have spent time designing the building or the infrastructure properly, then we need to serve the cooling loads in the most efficient manner using the low climate impact and natural refrigerants wherever possible. So the appropriate and efficient cooling equipment solutions with environmental refrigerants to develop the required amount of cooling or comfort, as the case may be, becomes the primary objective. And the third aspect is that once the building or the cold chain infrastructure or the I think cars or automobiles in which we drive, that has been designed, it's also very important to look at the operation and maintenance aspects. Again, the service technicians, I think you serve some of these equipment or devices, and also what are the policies in terms of setting standards for maintaining thermal comfort. These things become extremely important to have the right kind of impact at the country level, where we are not only trying to meet the sustainable development goals, but we are also trying to do it in the most environmentally benign fashion possible. So right sizing the demand for cooling and optimizing the supply of cooling, we have to apply both these strategies in conjunction. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of how the NCAP development process was thought about with the input of probably hundreds of experts and past experiences in developing national cooling action plans. And I'm going to just focus briefly upon stage one, and then I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Sneha Sachar, who is going to focus on cooling demand assessment and synthesis of NCAP creation. Next slide, please. So the most important aspect is that the intergovernmental collaboration, and even beyond the government, what role the civil society organizations play, what role the academic institutions play, I think that is going to be critical. But all of that has to be done under the guidance of a nodal coordinating entity, which in many cases it's the Ministry of Environment or the Ozone Cell. But depending on the construct of different countries, it can be different. And so we are looking at an NCAP development team that needs to come together before the process gets started. Whatever research and analysis has been done and whatever data is available, that needs to be also in place. The role of government entities and steering committees, advisory committees need to be formed. And then last but not the least, what is the participation from the private sector and industry, I think, in this whole process is going to be critical. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that we just want to highlight, because cooling is such a cross-cutting activity that the role of integrated policy making becomes absolutely critical. And not only from that there could be many policies that could be already in existence and they need to be integrated in the process, but it's also that how different ministries are going to come together. And also, I think at the central government level, at the state level, at the local level, how a ministry is going to drive this agenda of sustainable cooling becomes very, very important. So all this helps align, I think, the objectives and set in powerful integrative effect so that the whole that we are talking about is always greater than the sum of the parts. And And this is something that Mr. Tapka talked about, I think, which happened in the case of India Cooling Action Plan, where Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change drove the whole development process, but it was done in close partnership with entities like Bureau of Energy Efficiency, with entities like Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Department of Science and Technology, Ministry of Agriculture, which is responsible for cold chain. And also it needs to go beyond the government through a triple sector leadership approach, where government, private sector and civil society organizations, they all need to show, I think, equal commitment and bring to the table whatever work and experience that they have accumulated in this field. Thank you. Next slide. So very quickly, this is sort of my last slide in terms of contextual assessment and planning that we are talking about. How do we go about developing this, which is the starting point for any national cooling action plan? So, any country, and I think Cambodia is an example which is going through this process as NCAP methodology is getting tested there, and Indonesia has also started on this path. So whether the space cooling is going to be the highest priority for a country, or whether it's going to be the agricultural sector, or whether it's the vaccine that is going to receive, I think, the highest priority from the government, that becomes pretty important. So what are the national or international commitments that the country is making? So whether it's Paris Agreement, or whether it's Sustainable Development Goals, or whether it's the Montreal Protocol, that also needs to be kept in mind. What are some of the technology trends, and whether the technology is getting developed in-house, or whether the technology is getting imported in a country? We are talking about cold chain equipment or cooling and refrigeration equipment. That also factors very strongly as the country starts to set this context. And then what are the resources, capabilities and knowledge that resides in the country, and what kind of help international organizations such as UNEP and NCAP can bring and provide, or bilateral, multilateral organizations, that also is going to be important. Then identifying nodal government entity, identifying the multi-stakeholder engagement process, and also the NCAP development team, what kind of a role that is going to play. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sneha Sachar, who is going to start to talk about the cooling demand assessment a little bit more in detail. And Sneha, over to you from here.
Thank you, Satish. Greetings to all the distinguished guests, co-panelists, and attendees. Could we move forward to the next slide, please? I think, Marco, if you could jump a couple of slides and go to the one on data assessment. Yes. So I'm going to be talking about, Satish had shared the three-stage methodology process diagram, and he spoke about the first part of it, which was the country context assessment. And I'm jumping on to now the second part, cooling demand assessment. This is really at the heart of the National Cooling Action Plan development process. It's the second stage, as I mentioned, and probably is the most data-rich and analytical step in the entire process. Next slide, please. So what the cooling demand assessment entails is a thorough data-driven assessment of the existing as well as the future outlook of cooling, the existing baseline and the future outlook of cooling. So we would be assessing the current cooling demand, both the current demand that is being met and as well as the unmet demand, and I'll speak to that in a second. Then the energy consumption related to that cooling demand, the refrigerant consumption, the resulting emissions from it, and also a deep dive assessment into the various cooling sectoral priorities and context, which gives us a view into what could be some of the high impact interventions in the short term, as well as some strategic interventions in the long term. Next slide, please. So I want to start by just quickly speaking through some of the key terms that we use. So the met cooling demand refers to the cooling that is currently being delivered through mechanical means. And then in contrast, the unmet cooling demand implies the cooling demand that exists today, but is not currently served because of lack of access to cooling or even lack of access to electricity itself. So the total cooling demand in any country is really a sum total of the met cooling demand as well as the unmet cooling demand. That said, the reliable quantification of the unmet cooling demand is a challenging task, and there aren't too many proven methodologies that exist. There are some that are coming up. So the framework utilizes an approach where we suggest appropriate indicators to best assess the lack of access of cooling demand in the absence of modeling capabilities. And then also we talk about future growth scenarios. So one is a business as usual growth scenario, which projects how the cooling demand will evolve if we continue with the ongoing level of effort in terms of technologies and policy. And then there is an intervention scenario, which projects how the cooling demand will evolve based on an accelerated pace of effort, both across policies and technologies and also market facilitators. Next one, please. So while data is really crucial to the development of the cooling action plan, its availability, quality, and reliability is likely a common challenge in most countries. Even where data is available, typically it gives a view into the met cooling demand, that is the cooling demand that is being served, that is more easily quantifiable. Reliable quantification of the unmet cooling demand in a country related to lack of access of cooling is even harder, and thus far the attempts to quantify it are limited. That said, lack of good quality data in a country need not be a showstopper. There are several ways to work with whatever data a country has available. So to start with, we would leverage any available government databases, and existing country-specific research is a good starting point for gathering data. This should be supplemented with the fast-growing international body of work and data-driven research in cooling available in the public domain. For example, speaking about the lack of access to cooling, so our process seeks to incorporate relevant parameters from the SE for All needs assessment framework to ensure that the methodology includes relevant considerations for unmet cooling demand wherever possible, and encourages countries to promote access to cooling while also driving towards low climate impact pathways to cooling. Further, data gaps can be closed with logical assumptions grounded in the best available information in the country. And for this, engaging in-country experts, such as from academia, civil society organization, as well as the industry, is very, very beneficial. Next slide, please. So again, this is putting the cooling demand assessment within the context of the entire process. So we are speaking to step 3, where we are doing a deep dive for every respective sector and looking at what is the sector's baseline cooling demand, what is its future outlook looking like, and what are some of the sector-specific drivers and considerations. So looking a little bit deeper into that, next slide, please. So to assist this assessment, the methodology includes a set of data assessment framework. These are really tools to provide guidance on how a country would go about collecting the data and then analyzing the data. It also identifies key data input parameters and suggests different analysis methods depending upon the granularity and the quality of data available. So the methodology toolkit includes a framework for country context mapping, which is the step that Satish explained, where we're doing an overall context assessment for the country. And then the second set of data frameworks is really a deep dive into the cooling consumption sectors. And we've included 5 of the anticipated common cooling consumption sectors, which are space cooling in buildings, food cold chain, healthcare cold chain, mobile air conditioning, and industrial process cooling. Next slide, please. So the frameworks are directional in nature. That is, they are not intended to be prescriptive, but they are more a guide map, including ample flexible features to suit a country's capacities, needs, data granularity, as well as context. So the frameworks should be used in combination with the detailed steps described in the methodology. They are not intended as a modeling exercise, but rather as a guide map, with the main idea being that we wanted to present a framework that is within the reach of most countries today and can enable immediate and prioritized action towards climate-friendly cooling, enabling a country to best utilize whatever level of data it has available today and at least start taking some action forward. So that's the flavor and the intent of the data assessment frameworks. Next slide, please. So here I want to just lay out the different activities, a very high level overview of the different activities that are a part of this analytical exercise. If we take any of the cooling consumption sectors, let's say space cooling, we would first start with mapping out what are some of the characteristics of that sector in terms of quantitative analysis. What are some of the growth drivers in that sector? What are the prevalent technologies? And also, we want to keep in view what are some of the existing policies and programs and their intents that would definitely impact the quantitative assessment of this sector. Then we want to figure out what is it that we want to calculate within this sector. So what sort of data outcomes are we looking for? So again, using space cooling as an example, we would upfront decide that we want to look at the energy consumption in terms of units of terawatt hours or whatever units are relevant to any country, that we would look at the refrigerant consumption, we would look at the future growth patterns of these, and so on and so forth. So we decide what are the metrics and parameters. And then comes the step number 4, activity number 4 is deciding how we want to go about this calculation. And this will be driven by the quality and extent of data available in the country, which will then determine whether we can do a top-down assessment, a bottom-up assessment, or whether we can do a sort of a hybrid version where we are able to triangulate and validate the data. So the frameworks really guide the reader through the different possibilities in terms of working with the data. Activity 5 is finally collecting the data elements. And again, there are some pointers on where some available data resources might be as a starting point. And also some guiding questions to ask stakeholders in terms of uncovering some data elements. Finally, the 6th activity is really crunching the numbers and estimating the baseline rigorously. This is a crucial step because the future is just a projection and we would be growing forward from the baseline. So a rigorous estimation of the baseline is important so that it doesn't throw off our future estimates in any way. And then, of course, then the 7th activity is future growth projections. And we want to, again, look at if the cooling grew in a business as usual approach, where would we be in terms of impact? And if cooling grew with accelerated efforts across policies and technologies, then where would we be? And the differential between the two really is able to point us to the interventions that are available and feasible within each cooling sector. Next slide, please. So here again, this is a snapshot of, I will not attempt to walk through all of this, but this is a snapshot of how the data framework lays out for the reader what to calculate. So for example, again, this is taking space cooling as an example, and it suggests that we want to be looking at the cooling appliance stock. We want to be looking at annual demand side energy consumption. We want to be looking at annual refrigerant consumption, the related direct and indirect emissions, and then also assessing the sector's unmet cooling needs. And then in the lighter boxes, it kind of walks us through what are the different ways to calculate this, options for both top-down and bottom-up, and so on and so forth. So in addition to the quantitative assessment, as I mentioned, the box at the very far right shows us an assessment of the unmet cooling demands. So the frameworks point to utilizing relevant indicators to assess this. And these indicators are covered for the following three sectors: space cooling, food cold chain, and healthcare cold chain. So as an example, for space cooling, we might look at percentage of population without access to electricity, percentage of urban population living in inadequate housing, for example, for food cold chain, we may look at share of import and export market, share of local market versus organized retail, the existing food loss due to lack of cold chain. These kind of indicators would give us some sort of assessment of how the extent of the lack of access to cooling in those sectors. Next slide, please. Then we move on to bringing all of this data together into really tying it and processing it into synthesizing some recommendations for each sector. While we want to look at sector-specific recommendations, that is just a starting point, and it leads us into this third stage of the overall methodology development, which is then synthesizing everything together. That is bringing all the sectoral deep dives together and really consolidating them into a country-wide assessment of cooling and looking at what it shows in terms of the available opportunities and, very importantly, in terms of the synergistic approaches that are possible. Next slide, please. So in terms of overall recommendations and solutions and their integrations, we want to, each country could consider some ways of prioritizing recommendations. Some of the suggested parameters in the methodology are prioritization based on ease of implementation, based on the potential impacts and co-benefits, and prioritization based on synergies with the existing government policies and programs. This is also very important in terms of alignment with the stakeholders who are going to be the actual implementers of some of the recommendations. So to the extent possible, the NCAP recommendations should be aligned with any ongoing national and regional agendas. The frameworks also, as a starting point, suggest some example interventions which countries can consider. Again, this is intended as a starting point. For example, for space cooling, we might look at whether there are minimum energy performance standards, what is the extent of standard and labeling program in the country, and how we might be able to influence purchasing behaviors through maybe financial instruments. So these are just some examples as a starting point that a country may consider and then build off of these specific to their context and what the data tells us. Consolidation of sector-specific recommendations into an aggregated nationwide cooling assessment is very important. Again, we want to be looking at relative importance of sectors in terms of demand growth. In some countries, the transportation sector may be a bigger piece of the pie in terms of overall cooling needs. In some countries, maybe it's space cooling or industrial process cooling. So the relative size of cooling growth will have to be also kept in view in terms of assessing priorities for interventions. And finally, I want to end with that countries should consider building provisions within the cooling action plans to periodically revise periodically revise it as new data or even new technologies become available. In fact, the Cooling Action Plan can become a meaningful starting point for robust and transparent data on cooling. It can be a government database that captures all the data gathered during the development of the NCAP and iteratively updates this information. This would be significantly beneficial for the country's ongoing implementation efforts and for ongoing future cooling related work. So I'll end on that. Thank you very much. Passing it back to you, Lily.
Thank you, Sneha, and thank you, Satish. I'd like to now give Alvin 5 minutes to from Sustainable Energy for All to give us an overview of integrating access to cooling in the National Cooling Action Plans. Alvin, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lily. I hope that you can hear me well.
Yes.
Okay, I'll just share my slide. Can you see my slide? Is that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm from Vienna, and it's great to be over here. And at the outset, I would like to congratulate Cool Coalition, hosted by UNEP, and of course NCAP, to spearheading this very important initiative for spreading sustainability in the cooling sector. And as we have heard from all our eminent guests and distinguished speakers from in the beginning, that how cooling is so important when it comes to sustainable development goals, and pretty much kind of cuts across all the major SDG 17 trackers which are out there. So as we are now kind of entering into this phase where cooling sector has kind of become this important element, so we'll need to now see how we can make sure that most of the traditional way of looking at things was it was more of an energy planning kind of approach. We were also kind of looking at it from an emissions reduction kind of an approach, but now it's kind of more becoming a human development issue. And so can these NCAPs become more, can be looked from a human development kind of a document or a tracking effort for countries to make it a holistic and comprehensive way to look at sustainability in this sector. So a lot of the efforts that we are trying to do has been actually already captured by the good work done by Dr. Satish and Sneha. So I won't repeat that. But I have a few messages that maybe I would like to put in for the consideration of the colleagues from the governments and relevant stakeholders that are working in Asia for development of NCAPs. At right now, if you really look at the lack of access to cooling, there are four main categories that SE for All basically tries to put a taxonomy around. First is rural poor. Rural poor is essentially those populations that lack access to cooling, primarily because they are living under the poverty line of the global standard of $1.9 per day, and they generally do not have access to energy. Second is the urban poor. It's pretty much those who are the poverty line, under the poverty line, living under the poverty line in the urban areas, mostly in slums. Third is the lower middle income, those who have a buying or the purchasing power of less than $10 a day. And they can actually access some sort of cooling because they have access to electricity, but they typically tend not to be able to afford an AC, sometimes maybe a refrigerator, and they are generally what we call as a carbon captive population, because they typically tend to buy energy inefficient appliances because that's what they can afford. And then we come down to the middle income. That are basically the population that earns anywhere between $10 to $20 a day and have higher access to electricity and reliable electricity. They also have the ability to actually buy an energy efficient appliance or a climate friendly appliance, but typically costs do come in on the way because of their differing priorities. Now, if you look at Asia, the global share for rural poor is pretty much 49% in Asia, and urban poor is 61%. The lower middle income group is one of the highest, that is 78%, and middle income is around 84%. So most of the big populations and the changes that we're going to see in the future when it comes to access to cooling is in Asia. We tracked some of the numbers over the past 4 years, and we have seen that there was some improvement when it came to rural poor numbers, but the recent COVID crisis has pretty much increased the number of rural poor that lack access to cooling by 18 million. When it comes to urban poor, it has increased more to around 45 million. We have seen a decrease, in fact, in lower middle income. Actually, there was a shift from urban poor to lower middle income in the recent years, but with the varying economic conditions and especially COVID, we are seeing now a downward trend when it comes to the number of lower middle income, mostly because shifting back to the urban poor category. And then when it comes to the middle income, we have actually seen a rise over the past 4 years to 132 million people in the middle income. So when we see these trends, there are some factors of questions that maybe policymakers or researchers or all the major stakeholders need to think about. One is that what are the kind of cooling needs that various risk groups and the solutions that they can afford or access? For instance, in the rural poor, there needs to have cold storage that can allow them to decrease their post-harvest losses and increase their yields and incomes might be more important than their need for thermal comfort. But of course, thermal comfort is very important for them to be productive at the end of the day. When it comes to urban poor, what are the kind of issues that needs to be considered when it comes to their cooling needs, and similarly to lower middle income and middle income. The next question would be, what are the solutions and planning that needs to be considered for cooling needs of the population without access to reliable electricity? We are trying to actually right now disseminate or at least accelerate the adoption of energy efficient and climate friendly cooling solutions. The challenge is that in Asia, almost 200 million people still do not have access to electricity. How would they access these solutions? What are the kind of latest technological innovations or financing innovations that can enable these populations that are off the grid to access such solutions? That would be a very important factor. Then the most important, at least for this particular theme that we're trying to discuss today, is what is the impact on the future energy and refrigerant demand. And this is where I would like to actually draw the focus of on the unmet cooling demand, which Sneha just mentioned. I think one of the biggest challenges is that till now, most of the energy planning around cooling has been based on the met demand, because that's what we know is the stock in the country. We have seen how it is, the stock is increasing based on the imports levels and based on the GDP growth. But the issue is that for ensuring that the future planning is in a sustainable way, we need to be able to estimate what is this unmet demand through access to cooling lens, or through the economic kind of relations of the cooling sector with the various sectors. So that will be the most important kind of next step in kind of ensuring how this planning can be holistic. And the final question is, what are the kind of enabling policies to ensure that different risk groups can adopt sustainable cooling solutions? We have spoken a lot on the importance of the active cooling solutions, but there is a lot of other passive solutions, cooling as a service, different kind of innovative models that can actually make sustainable cooling solutions affordable. We truly believe that only once these solutions are affordable, they can be adopted in a holistic manner. Final slide, essentially urging all of you to basically now who are in the mix of developing their NCAPs or who are in the process of developing their NCAPs to look at cooling from a comprehensive data collection and data needs framework for thermal comfort, food, nutrition, and healthcare. Optimize them for, of course, we need to optimize them to be energy efficient and climate friendly, but it's very important to also to look at aspects such as protecting the vulnerable and also leveraging. We heard how India has a very comprehensive approach on how it works with different ministries. I think that's a very important factor of making sure cooperation and coordination is a part of this action plan. And I think my final message would be that when it comes to energy efficiency and emissions, the benefits are very clear. But I think the benefits are now also very clear to the Montreal Protocol community. Once we are able to understand what is the unmet demand, and we are able to reduce this unmet demand through reduction of heating, the heat loads, it will automatically result in reduction of refrigerant demand, which will be of great help when it comes to compliance of the Montreal Protocol. And there are multiple ways of looking into this. We are right now actually also helping the Cool Coalition in Cambodia to think this through. We are also actually now helping out in Indonesia in the data collection and framework and assessment side of things, especially for the cold chain. And we are more than happy to help other countries to take this approach. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alvin, for that presentation. So now, if anybody who's not speaking, kindly mute themselves. If you're not speaking, please mute. Thank you. Okay, so we'll now be moving into two breakouts. Breakout 1 is on sharing experience on NCAP development. We will hear from representatives from Cambodia, from Vietnam, and from China on their NCAP development experience. And we will have a second breakout group that will run in parallel, where we will hear about the experience from Sri Lanka, from Indonesia, and from India. And that will be moderated by my colleague and co-host at UN SCAP, Ksenia. So we will be returning back to plenary at 3 p.m. That gives us 40 minutes for the discussion. So we'll see you in these breakout groups.
2030 Cambodia electricity consumption is forecast to more than triple in comparison to the level of demand in 2015. And in 2017, the average estimated penetration rate of cooling equipment in Cambodia was about 2%. And considering a country's steady economic growth and rising income, energy use of space cooling and refrigeration is bound to increase. And at the same time, Cambodia national determined contribution aimed at 16% reduction in greenhouse gas emission from the energy sector in comparison to the business as usual scenario by 2030. And the intention of carbon emission reduction in the future that supported under National Green Growth Strategic Plan 2013 National Policy Strategic Plan National Policy Strategy and Action Plan on Energy Efficiency 2017, and also consider for sub-degree on ODS management at 2005. So in the term of the development of the NCAP in Cambodia, so Cambodia in collaboration with UNEP and UN SCAP started the development of the National Cooling Action Plan for Cambodia in the context of co-creation. The NCAP has identified comprehensive action to reduce energy use and emission from cooling aligned with plans related to emission from refrigerant transition. Cambodia is the first country to pilot the cooling coalition comprehensive methodology. NCAP for Cambodia will cover the following important cooling sector: space cooling in building, cold chain and refrigeration, food and healthcare, mobile air conditioner, industrial processing. Access to cooling is particularly important for Cambodia, and it is presently quite low across cooling sector, but is likely to expand, driven by economic growth and increasing income. To effectively implement of this, we have collaborated in the key stakeholder for NCAP development. So the NCAP national team will be comprised by national Ministry of Environment and also the National Council for Sustainable Development. Lead on the Ministry of Environment lead on the Montreal Protocol implementation, stakeholder engagement for NCAP, data collection for NCAP, for the sustainable, also National Council for Sustainable Development under the climate change, which is a climate change Department of Climate Change representing, so that also lead on NDC update and inclusion of the sustainable cooling. Drafting the context of NCAP based on the national assessment prepared by the international team. And there is also in the NCAP international team also like calculation, UN the Environment Program, UN NCAP, and Alliance for Energy Efficiency Economy that also support in the comprehensive methodology for NCAP development, technical guideline and support through the NCAP process, international expertise on sustainable cooling best practice institution, also live global network for partner and expert. In terms of the in collaboration, so that we have collaborated with some concerned ministry, that the domain is three ministry, that the Ministry of Land Management, Urban Planning and Construction, in development of Cambodia NDC roadmap for building and construction 2020-2050. Passive cooling strategy are considered for inclusion into building legislation, urban planning, and we and other agencies of Ministry of Mine Energy have been developed of energy efficiency, minimum energy performance standard and label, and also regional harmonization project with the Asian Center for Energy, with the Ministry of Public Works and Transportation, that program on reducing greenhouse gas emission from the transport sector, refrigerant, freight transport related to cold chain. Next slide, please. So the NCAP development in the progress that we have been like in some step that the country mapping and NCAP planning. So collecting the high level data to set context and guide the data collection for the sector, and demand the scope and extent to the NCAP, focus on the country specific priority area, understand socioeconomic implication that we start in September to October 2020, and from October 2020 to March 2021 we have the sector data collection, space cooling in building, cold chain and refrigeration, that the food and healthcare, mobile air conditioning, industrial process cooling, and start from March to May 2021 regarding the sector data analysis and intervention, so that combine the data result and define the met and unmet national demand, project how the demand will grow, and develop a scenario of ambitious policy to compare, identify sustainable and impactful policy intervention, and start from May to June 2021, so the NCAP integration and final recommendation, develop and prioritize NCAP recommendation, map the expected impact of NCAP recommendation, validation with the working group, and consultation with the expert. And start next step from February, July 2021, and NCAP draft and review contextual and methodological chapter, policy recommendation chapter, reviewed by the steering committee, draft revision, and submit for approval. So that in terms of this one, and next slide, please. So that we have been during the conduct for the data collection and survey that carried out by the consultant and national ozone unit in cooperation with the local government during the September 20 February 2021 and rechecking until April 2021. So the target group have been conducted like supply for refrigerant and cooling appliance, importer, distributor, service sector, workshop, technician, owner, user, and of rack equipment, factory, manufacturing, public building, business center, supermarket, hospital, clinic, school, hotel, guest house, restaurant, casino, etc. And we observe in the observation on the survey data that depend on the subject. That next slide, please. That they depend on the subject motivation, honestly, memory, and ability to respond. So the servicing sector may not be motivated to give accurate answer due to the concern that the information could be shared with the other agency. And estimation from the household survey, validity and accuracy of the estimation on household with or without AC, and number of AC and other cooling appearance per household. Another sector also need long process and need parsimony everywhere to get the data information. Sometimes have to revisit the place for survey. Next slide, please. So that the preliminary cooling demand assessment that the total carbon emission can be like CO2 emission and estimate by 2030 around 25 million metric ton and 33.9 million ton CO2. This one, the estimation as business as usual. So that I will give the next part to my colleague, Dr. Gabi for his presentation on the development of the NCAP, also the linkage NCAP to the NC. Dr. Gabi, please say your floor.
Dr. Kyo, if I could kindly ask you to present within 3 minutes, because we're just a bit short on time, that would be great.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parks, and thank you for the coalition. So my presentation will focus on the start with the linkage between the NCAPs and NDC, and then go to the fracture of the NCAPs. So in the NCAP, we will provide with the background, situation analysis, existing policies, the visions, missions, implementation strategies, and so on. So please move to the next slide, please. So the connection with the NDC, we have this for the NCAP, for NDC in Cambodia, we have the main sector for that emit the greenhouse gas emissions. The highest one is the forest and other land use, and then the second in 2016 it's agriculture, and the third one is energy. But it is expected by 2030 the energy will take over the in the for GHG emissions. So with the national determined contribution, we expect that we could reduce 42% of greenhouse gas emission with our interventions. And in that NDC, one of the intervention is to promote the implementation of NCAPs. Could you go to the next slide, please? So these are the interventions. We try to reduce the direct emission by transit the F-gas into in air conditioning and refrigerations, and reduce the indirect emissions through the improved cooling efficiency and inclusions of performance of requirement passive cooling building code and implementation of passive cooling measures in the NCAPs. The next slide, please. Yeah, and we also introduce a wide range of intervention, including electrical equipment labeling, enforcing energy building code, and promoting sustainable practices in manufacturing and integrated public transportations in main cities and others. Go to the next slide, please. And this is the potential mitigation for our NCAPs. We plan for 10 years. It's a 10-year plan from 2021 to 2030, but we also go for longer terms up until 2040. So the potential for mitigation, as you can see here, we can reduce about 9.2% reductions by 2030 and 15.6% reductions by 2040. It's quite a large share in terms of the intervention for greenhouse gas mitigations. So next slide, please. So our intervention, we will focus on it's a 10-year plan, but we will also provide the immediate intervention plan of 5 years and then midterm 10 year and for up to 20 years by 2040. But for the long-term intervention, we will provide a list of interventions, and then we will revise after 10 years. We have to revise because there may be technology advance. There will be changes in technology and research and economic sector as well. Next slide, please. So for implementations mechanism, we have already had the intersectoral working group for implementation of the convention, protocol, and international agreements. So they are this is the institution that play the coordination role between different agencies, line ministries, private sectors, research institutes, and do the public awareness raisings and could conduct research and amend the policy and introducing the new policy that are adaptive to the context. Next slide, please. And then for financial mechanism, we will seek financial support for implementation through multilateral fund, bilateral fund, and private sector participations. And for monitoring and evaluation of the NCAP, we hope to have the data management system for cooling sector monitoring and evaluations, and so that we could assess the midterm through the midterm evaluations and the final term, and continue to amend and improve the interventions. And next slide, please. So this is just a template. We will focus on the key interventions and what are the sectors that we want we're going to address, and what are the ministry in charge, and we will have the cost estimates for each action as well, and how it linked to SDG goals. And for the sake of the short timing, that's pretty much the part of I would like to present to you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kyo, and we will share all presentations afterwards with guests. Are there any burning questions before I turn over to Vietnam? I'm going to look in the chat if there's anything really urgent to ask before we move over to Vietnam. I don't see anything. Okay. So I'd like to now turn over to Vietnam. I know that Cook, who's the National Ozone Coordinator from Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, wanted to say just a few words before handing it over to her colleague, Mr. Tu, from the National Ozone Unit. Cook, are you there to say a few words?
Yes. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Lily. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a great opportunity for us to gather here and share information about the NCAP development process among the countries. I truly appreciate the opportunity given to us to talk about the current work on the NCAP. In recent years, the demand for cooling has increased dramatically and putting a lot of stress for our electricity grid and contributing significantly to global warming. And in Vietnam, the greenhouse gas emission will be doubled by 2030 if we don't act. So that's the one main reason why we have prioritized actions on efficient and climate-friendly cooling. And we have included that in our enhanced NDC. We have also ratified the Kigali Amendment on 2019, and we'll start with some phasing down activities of the HFC. So yeah, I'm very glad that we have been able to access to some fundings from the KSAP to develop our national cooling action plan, and the objective of which is to focus on room air conditioning. The development process of the NCAP is being led by the Energy Efficiency Agency under MOIT, the Ministry of Industry and Trade, in close cooperation with the Ozone unit. And we have gone through some consultation process and being finalized at the moment. So in a short moment, my colleague would introduce to you the NCAP, and also the consultant team who have been helping us with the preparations are here for any further details that you may have. So last to say, I thank you for the opportunity and hope that we can learn from each other to accelerate our actions on efficient cooling. And in the coming time, we would probably be focusing on urban cooling to support our effort to recover from COVID-19 situations, as well as to improve the energy efficiency standards. We can also focus on commercial and industrial refrigeration sector, which are quite challenging, but I hope together and I believe that together we can make a change. So with no further delay, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague to talk about the NCAP, and the team are here to support. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share. Thank you, Lily. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Cook. So great. We will now go through the presentation with you, Mr. Tu.
Yes. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll just have to maybe go through perhaps half of the slides and share the rest with the colleagues due to the limited time, if that's okay with you. Okay.
So let's go to the slide 10 and we'll talk about the National Cooling Plan Action.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now we'll talk about the National Cooling Plan Action of Vietnam. So first, can you move to the next slide, please? So first, the objective of the NCAP is focused on the room air conditioning. So it's to accelerate the AC sector, transform to the energy efficiency, which is the inverter technology. So the plan is aimed to provide the context and the reasoning for enhanced policy action to complement the initiative to remove or address the technical barriers. Besides that, it makes the case for action by scenario analysis of various energy performance level by incorporating fighting of technical barriers while describing the cooling policy framework in Vietnam and a possible area to enable fulfilling the mandate and priority of two key cooling government focal points, which is the Ministry of Natural Resources and the National Ministry of Industry. And for the development process of the cooling plan had gone through a number of steps that you can see in the blue box on the right, such as like the review and analysis of existing policy and regulatory, or the assess the room air conditioning market to establish a baseline for estimating the impact of potential policy intervention. Next slide, please. So the NCAP is developed using different methods, including literature and desk review of existing related policy, regulatory, and surveys, conduct a gap analysis to identify any legal, institutional, and technical obstacle preventing achievement of policy objective. The conduct survey to collect the commercial and technical parameter and update the data on room air condition. They perform modeling analysis to project the impact of more ambitious maps on the future AC market. And finally is the stakeholder consultation, which aim to obtain the comment, feedback on the study of various sources via the direct and indirect interview, online meeting, and group discussion between the involvement focal agency, like ministry, or testing center, or even the research institute. Next slide, please. So here is the comparison between the Vietnam maps and various targets. So as you can see in the table upper left, there are three different proposed options as shown. The option 1, 2, and 3, which is respectively the increasing by 20, 47, and 84% of maps of CFPF value above the current level. So we can easily see that the CSPF value for each option, the option 1 is 3.7, the 2 is 4.56, and the option 3 is 5.7. Compare that to the characteristic of Vietnam market on the right. We have the Vietnam market characteristic at the moment of the energy efficiency is ranged from 3 to 4.12, in which 78% are inverter air condition. So therefore, all the fixed air condition are eliminated under the option 2 and the option 3. That's why the best switch option for Vietnam is the option 1 with the 37% of the market would qualify for the 5-star level for split air condition. Next slide, please. This one is for the summary of benefit of different options. Here we have two different tables. The first one on the upper is the energy efficiency improvement scenario and the target, NDC target. And the lower one is the net benefit of greenhouse gas emission reduction. So in summary, in short, we can see that the life cycle cost saving will be higher. Next one, please. So last, to promote the deployment of more climate-friendly AC, the proposed approach is aimed to first increase the market share and promote energy saving in the cooling sector. Second is to contribute to meeting the country SCFC phase down and SFC phase down also. The third one is contribute towards the achievement of the greenhouse gas emission reduction objective. And the last one is to promote the carbon lifestyle for consumer and increase the capacity of manufacturer and servicing sector. So this aim can be achieved by implementing different proposals as shown on the right, such as the revised maps and energy labeling, apply the maps and star labeling to other type of air condition, or promote faster transition to the climate-friendly refrigerant. I say that. So that's all I want to present. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tu, for that presentation. I think both you and Cambodia have shown very clearly how NCAPs can link together energy efficiency together with the HFC phase down and out. I'd like to now hand over to Dr. Meng, who will speak about the China National Cooling Action Plan. Dr. Meng, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this exciting event. I'm very pleased to share our China story regarding cooling efficiency and about the development of our National Green Cooling Action Plan. So before we go to our national plan, actually I want to share some experiences for the cooling efficiency improvement in China. I think that for the importance from my side, I think the development of a minimum performance standard system is very important for the cooling efficiency. Actually, in China, the government and the public send MAP minimum energy performance standard as one of the top priority for the cooling efficiency improvement. And in 1980s, we released the maps for cooling products, including the fridge, air conditioners for the first time. And ever since then, we have released a map for 14 categories of cooling products and so far. Yep, great. Right now, yep. I think actually from these slides we can see that right now we have a very good standard system for the maps for cooling products. Next one, please. Yeah, but last one, the previous. Yep.
This one?
Yep. So actually, with the development of the past 30 years in the maps, actually, I think some of our national maps reached the very advanced level. Let's see, here is our maps for room air conditioner. We just revised these standards in 2019, and in the new maps for room air conditioners, we actually have the energy performance requirements for the fixed speed and variable speed room air conditioners together. And so right now the energy performance requirement has been improved to the advanced levels, the same as the European standards and other advanced international standards. So the great achievement is with the past 2 years. Actually, the fixed speed air conditioners in China market had been phased out. Next one, please. Yes, so as I just mentioned, the cooling efficiency is one of the top priority for our government and for the public. We see it as a very important tool to fight climate change and save energy. And so in June 2019, 7 Chinese ministries have released a National Green Cooling Action Plan, and the NDRC, or National Development Reform Commission, is a leading ministry in this program. And so actually immediately after the release of our national plan, I think there's a very positive international response we have received in the also in the same month, in the June 2019 during the G20 summit in Japan. So actually the foreign minister of China, France, and the Secretary General of UN, and they have expressed their welcome and encouraged for and support for China National Cooling Action Plan. And as we just see, the France and the UN welcome the release of China Green Cooling Action Plan, and actually they encourage all countries to take decisive actions to improve energy efficiency in global industry. Next one, please. Yeah, so generally the principle for a national cooling plan is which is designed to be market-oriented and government-supported. So standard is one of the first top priority, and which focus on the efficiency improvement both in the growing market and existing market. The purpose is to improve the cooling efficiency and to promote the application of the environmental friendly product, green cooling product, and also to agree high quality and green development of cooling industry. So there's a specific goal has been set in this document. So by 2022, to increase the energy efficiency levels in the market of cooling products, including the room air conditioner and VRF, by more than 20, to increase the market share of the green cooling products by 20%, and achieve annual electricity savings of I think about 100 billion terawatt hours. It's a huge saving. And by 2030, increase the cooling energy efficiency of large public buildings by 30%, and the overall cooling energy efficiency by more than 25%, increase market share by more than 40%. And it is expected to achieve annual electricity saving of 400 billion terawatt hours. Next one, please. So to reach all these goals, so there's some main tasks we need to do. First is a standard. So we need to we are required to improve on maps for cooling efficiency with reaching or existing the maps in developed countries. And I think that means to reach the international advanced level. And grade 1 energy efficiency, that is energy efficiency, and that the grade 1 is for the most efficient product. So to reach the international leading levels, so we to achieve, so we are required to revise our existing standard, develop a new standard. And also we need to strengthen our implementation of standards, because in China, usually our MAPS standards is being used to be with our policies, regulations, and other law. So actually, that is why we call it the mandatory. The other main task is related to the technology development and industry update and international cooperation and the supply of green cooling products. So I think that that's all the main tasks we need to do in the next step. So anyway, I think that's all for today. Okay, thank you. Lily.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meng, and thank you so much, Mr. Tu, and thank you, Cook and Mr. Pak. I hope this has been informative for all of the guests, and we will be sharing the presentations. And now we will go back to the plenary. I will also, please do put your questions in chat. We will be able to put you in touch with each other to further discuss after this meeting. Thank you. We're going to now click on the chat link to go to the main plenary. Hello and welcome back to the plenary. I hope that you had a chance to have good exchange on the NCAP development experiences of countries. Please do continue to pose questions in the chat, and we will try to put you in touch with each other to continue the discussions after this meeting. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Xiaofeng Hu, Montreal Protocol Regional Senior Coordinator for the Asia Pacific Office of UNEP at the Ozone Action Compliance Assistance Program. Xiaofeng, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks, Lily. And can you right now see my presentation?
Yes, we can see your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to present you some thought about how to enhance refrigerant management under the NCAP. So I'm working with the UNEP's Ozone Action Program, or you can call us Compliance Assistance Program. Basically, we assist the developing countries for the implementation of the Montreal Protocol, and including the Kigali Amendment and the multilateral fund framework. So we have the different group globally and in the different region. And the team I'm in right now is based in Bangkok, and we are working with the 38 Asia and the Pacific developing countries. So I think the earlier presentation have shared a good perspective on the NCAP development process, and what they use is a collection process, and it's quite comprehensive. In my presentation, I would like to focus from the technical perspective on the cooling sector. Yeah, sorry. So the NCAP is really ideal vehicles at the national level to guide the cooling sector to be developed in a sustainable way. And we know right now, you see under the NCAP, there are two fundamental issues in the cooling sector. Basically, you see how to control the HCFC and the HFC and the Montreal Protocol, and also how to improve the energy efficiency. So we can make sure where we can continuously meet the needs of the cooling service, we can minimize the side impact to the SDG target. And fortunately, and due to the nature of the cooling equipment, these two, the issue and energy efficiency and the phase out, phase down activity will be linked, side by side. They are like you see the two sides of one coin. They will not be able to separate them. And all these two issues basically will be linked with the refrigerant management. So when I talk about the refrigerant management, is not only you see talk about the phase out or phase down of the HFC or the HFC in the future, but also you see for the new refrigerant will be phased in and to replace the old refrigerant. So you can see the refrigerant management is really, you see, integrated part of the sector transformation, and is not only relevant with the ODS phase out or the HFC phase down, but also will be really linked with the energy efficiency delivery. The one example is that you see how many refrigerant charged in the system will affect the operation of the performance of the cooling system, basically the energy efficiency. Also, as a result of the Montreal Protocol implementation, the new generation of the refrigerant right now we are being phased in is either flammable or toxic, or you have the higher working pressure, which posed a serious potential health risk that we need to really address systematically in the cooling sector. And next two slides I will talk about, you see the how the refrigerant management will affect the cooling sector. But in general, you see we will say in the servicing sector in all the developing countries is much more challenge compared with the refrigerant management in the manufacturing sector. So this one just want to show how the refrigerant management will need to be integrated in the life cycle of the cooling equipment, and all the aspects in the different stage what you need to consider. For example, for the manufacturer and for the designing, and right now I think the one challenge that is how to balance the flammable refrigerant charge amount while retaining the high energy efficiency. For example, you may know for the hydrocarbon R290 right now is considered to be used as a room air conditioner refrigerant, but because R290 have the very high flammability, so the charging size is very limited, is under the international standard. But with the limited charge size, energy efficiency will be difficult to achieve, and they need to have more technical solution to improve that, which make the cost very high. So this is just one example. And in the production line, you see for the cooling unit, of course you need to have additional, you see some measures, and either you need to have the procedures, and also you need to have some equipment to be like the sensors and to be installed. And for the storage, for the transportation, and you also need to have very specific consideration. Of course, for the installation and the maintenance, they will affect the servicing sector. I mean the energy efficiency, and of course also for the phase out and phase down very specifically. So this is the highlight of the understanding, and from the most famous, I mean the associations or the Standard Institute, or even our Kigali, I mean the KISAP program. And you can see, and the servicing sector right now is one of the block that you see the adoption of the lower GWP, but the higher energy efficient equipment into the market, as per China Household Electrical Appliance Association. And also installation and is so important, and the maintenance is so important. They can affect 30% of the energy efficiency. And of course, they will finally will affect the carbon emission in the sector. So how the servicing sector really looks like in our region? So basically, you see the technicians and who is really the main player in the servicing sector. They are not really well trained in most countries. They just learn from their master or just learn that in their job. And they are poorly paid and also not the favorite job and for the young generation. If you talk about the vocational training school, and they tell you that the most cases very difficult for them to get the good drop out of the high school, I mean the student. And in some countries, for the installation is conducted by the seasonal works. That means they just do during the summertime, and when the industry getting busy. Then after that, they just left. Next year, they have another new group of the people who don't know anything about this sector. They just get training for 3 or 4 days. Yeah. So for the servicing sector itself, and it's very informal, and nobody really is responsible for the servicing sector, unless they're they're owned by the manufacturer itself. And also for the servicing sector is not very easy to access by the authority. And if you want to disseminate information, you don't know where they are. And as mentioned, they don't have the required skills, and they are the family business in a lot of countries. And also the servicing sector, they don't have the good equipment or the tools if you want to handle some of the risky refrigerant. So that's what we are facing right now in our servicing sector. So if I can put more about what really the linkage of the refrigerant management with this sector transformation, we can see from the technology perspective, as I already mentioned, the charging size and the safety is really connected to each other. And currently, the industry still do a lot of the R&D work. But what they are doing right now, they're doing, in fact, is try to see how they can use the flammable or toxic refrigerant and in a different way, which might be already reduce the energy efficiency of the system. Like you see for the ammonia, they can be used very easily with very high energy efficiency, but because of the safety consideration, they should use the cascade technology. They should use the second round of the cycle. So which will definitely reduce the energy efficiency. And because of the safety concern, right now you see the supplier of the reliable and competitive spare part for the lower GWP alternatives is still not there. So it's really affect the market transition to the lower GWP alternatives. From the policy regulation perspective, we also face a lot of challenge. And like what I mentioned for the national international standard, for the safety reason and the charging size and energy efficiency is still a lot of debate how we can change that. And at the national level, some countries they have the building code is not allowed to use a high energy efficient but flammable refrigerant in the buildings. And of course, for the servicing sector, we know that already. And also, I just want to highlight you see the one thing that is from the report of the UNEP, or we call the TAP report. The TAP is called you see the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel and the Montreal Protocol. So this report released in September 2020. And they say that you see that because of the ambitious MAPs, MEPS, alone can undermine the HFC phase down by encouraging improved energy efficient AC equipment, but with the use of the high GWP refrigerant, including R410A, especially in countries that are primarily technology serious. So it's happening already. Some countries reintroduced a lot of the high energy efficient R410A room air conditioner. But of course, you see this one compared with the 22, you have the more higher GWP. So we need to have the how to say, coordinated approach in this area. For the market, and I don't want to go detail, but for the market right now, because what I mentioned, because of safety concern and the energy efficiency, this might be not high. If you want to achieve the high energy efficient equipment, they need to put a lot of the capital investment for the manufacturer. So which make you see their products less competitive in the market. So they need to make more effort for this one. And also in the market, I think a lot of the consumer, they have the misunderstanding and about the low GWP alternatives. And in some cases, you see the media and also you see have the misleading information about you see the risk of the new technology, which also stop the introduce of the low GWP, high energy efficient products. So this is one just to show that you see the, under the Montreal Protocol, we already you see to make a lot of effort. Try you see to, while we are phased out HCFC, we can you see also try to see how we can safely use the HFC. So this is what we did, and we have the good practice training, we have the safety training, we help the country to develop and adopt the national safety standard. And we're also working with the national technical and vocational education and the training system, try to integrate the good practice, including the safety, including the energy efficiency, into their training and certification system. And we also try to organize some of the very specific training activities, for example, for the ammonia and for the R290, for the carbon dioxide, which you can see this is already phased in new generation. I mean, we say new generation because they are just right now, you see, re-engaged, and is not really you see directly linked to the phase out of the HCFC. But if you want to sustain the phase out, we need to really you see make sure all the alternative will be safely used. And at the manufacturer level, you see the multilateral fund also pay extra money for them to have the safety manufacture. But with all this, we still found is not enough. We really need you see the NCAP also to consider this challenge and to integrate the refrigerant management into the NCAP. And for example, you see when you do the assessment of the needs, and you need to consider about which kind of the alternatives will be introduced. If you want to introduce the higher risk, but the alternatives and whether you have the skillful technicians ready, is there or not. And when you project, you see the energy efficiency, and you also need to consider about whether, you consider whether the servicing and the technicians, they can really you see maintain the servicing, the energy efficiency, like what they designed. So this is the thing that I would like to say. You see, you need to really consider this refrigerant management. You see, in the whole process when you develop the NCAP, and I also you see to try to put some of the recommendations. Maybe you can consider that, And when you develop the NCAP, and for example, you see apart from National Ozone Unit and the Energy Efficiency Authority, we need to engage you see more others, and so they can really manage the whole process. And we can also help the country to further development of their safety related standard. And we work with a training institute and to integrate and to train the technicians. And we are lucky you see in India, and I think they also have the servicing sector, how to address that. So with this, I think I just finished my presentation, and over to you, Lily. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xiaofeng, for giving us some ideas on how to synergize NCAPs with the HFC phase down and out. I'd like to give the floor to Anderson Alves, Regional Coordinator for Asia Pacific from UNDP, to give us a quick overview of mainstreaming national cooling plans into national strategies. Anderson, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lily. Just a second, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so thank you very much. My name is Anderson Alves. I am coordinating the Asia Pacific sub-team of the Montreal Protocol unit, Chemicals and Waste, and I'm part of the United Nations Development Program. The UNDP is also one of the implementing agencies of the Multilateral Fund for the implementation of the Montreal Protocol, and we assist several countries in the world to meet their targets under the Montreal Protocol. We are also accredited agency for the CHEF and the GCF. And specifically with the CHEF, we also have a number of energy efficiency related projects in many areas. And we also work with a number of other bilateral and multilateral, including philanthropies, to develop and implement projects supporting countries in many areas related to cooling sector and energy efficiency. More specifically, we have partnered with the KCEP in a number of projects to support deploying energy efficiency equipment, improving cooling technologies, and deploying pilot and demonstration projects. In my presentation, the reason of my presentation today is specifically to try to connect the work that we've done with the national cooling action plans in 13 countries in all regions of the world with other types of national and international policies that could benefit or could complement each other. As I said, we are supporting 13 countries to develop their cooling plans, being that these countries listed in blue were the countries that already completed their cooling plans, and the ones in red are in the final steps of completing their cooling plans today. It was said many times, so I won't discuss this more in detail, but it's just to remember that cooling sector serves a multitude of purposes, and today it is essential to our daily lives. So basically everything that we do or products that you consume are related to the cooling sector, either at the industrial level, at the level of processing and production, either in the cold chain distribution of food and vaccines now that we are fighting against COVID, and for our thermal comfort as an essential, in many countries, as an essential mean to survive in hard conditions. It was already said also by Alvin earlier about the challenges that we are facing in terms of placing the future of cooling under the energy demand scenario. And the ones that haven't read yet, I would strongly suggest you to read the Future of Cooling report issued by the IEA in 2018, which bring us very interesting analysis and projections about the cooling needs that we may face in the next 30 years, and also discuss a little bit of the efficient cooling scenarios that could help us to save these $3 trillion in investment and running costs by 2050. And we believe that the national cooling plans could be an essential instrument to support this strategy, because it can at the same time provide us a very specific scenario analysis in our countries, but also help to define these informed decision making scenarios and roadmaps for our implementation in the future. So under the policy framework, we see that today 3 main policy documents of policy routes can coexist, touching matters of energy efficiency in the cooling sector. The first one at the national level relates to the national energy plans that each country developing to position themselves and to deploy their investments, their long-term investment in energy generation and demand. There are also national cooling plans that are developed to define the investment lines for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Under the Paris Agreement, we all know that we have the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. They are revised every 5 years and settle the roadmaps to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And under the Montreal Protocol, although it's not directly linked to the energy efficiency matters, in the end, the activities implemented to phase out HCFCs and in the future that will phase down the consumption of HFCs can eventually bring additional co-benefits to improved energy efficiency. That was already demonstrated and discussed by Maggie in the opening of this workshop. So basically, the national cooling plans can be a 4th document, and usually our work with these countries was to develop this 4th standalone document that could specifically discuss the cooling sector. But at the same time, it can also act as a link to these 3 separate documents, or as a framework that connects the cooling sector in all of these 3 spheres that we are discussing here. And this is because these documents, the 3 documents that I explained, usually they don't enter into the cooling sector per se, but it goes on an overarching strategy that we know that encompasses the cooling sector. But the national cooling plan has the beauty of discussing in detail the needs of the cooling sector. And it was, as it was presented, for example, in the breakout group 2 that I participated by our colleague Modika from Sri Lanka, where they could identify the most important sectors for short and long-term action and define a very clear and precise roadmap with predictions of the energy efficiency impacts during this process. So when we putting this policy framework in action, we already have some tangible examples that came from this exercise of preparing and approving these cooling plans. The first one relates to Trinidad and Tobago. This is a small island development states in the Caribbean. The document was done as a standalone document and placed as a national policy level approved by the cabinet of the Prime Minister. It was approved in 2019, and it's already under implementation. This document is to be reviewed every 5 years, and we are supporting Trinidad and Tobago to implement its phase 1. The phase 1 basically builds from the baseline established by the Montreal Protocol activities, and we managed to combine a multitude of co-financing sources with the support of the finance of JEF to improve the energy efficiency in what the country define as most sensitive sectors, that which are the health and educational sector, and district cooling strategy that can support the high energy demand in one industrial sector of the island. In Lebanon, it is also a standalone document, but it was different from Trinidad and Tobago was not approved as a national policy level, but as a guidance to policymakers. Because in this way, this guidance document can be used to improve those 3 standalone documents that I show you in the previous slide. The document was approved in 2021. I'm sorry. It is expected to be revised every 3 or 4 years, and it has the great landmark that is to raise ambition in the energy performance of the air conditioning and refrigeration applications, and it has a target to align. Actually, Lebanon has no maps today. So it has the target to create the maps, and in the long term align these maps with the same European Union maps, because Lebanon is highly dependent on exports from European countries. So at the same time, it can remove 50% of the inefficient equipment from their market and improve greatly the energy efficiency of these equipments. It can also facilitate the trade and maybe even cut costs of the international trade for their cooling sector. And the final example I use is Panama. It was also a document that was approved recently in 2021. The launching ceremony was only 2 weeks ago. And it is curious because the cooling plan is a subset of the National Energy Plan of Panama that runs from 2015 to 2050. So basically the cooling plan directly inputs strategies and roadmaps to support the deployment of this long-term energy plan. It identifies specific challenges and opportunities for energy efficiency under the cooling sector, and most importantly, it aligns the energy plan with the Montreal Protocol and management plans that Panama is implementing right now. So my final message is that at the same time that we are, of course, the main reason of this workshop is to talk about National Cooling Action Plan. But in the other side, and considering that many countries present here also have specific challenges with the heating sector. So at the same, I would dare to say that this could even be extended to also handle heating challenges, energy efficiency in the heating sector, because, for example, the use of chillers and reversible heat pumps that is being more popular now can be used by countries that require heating needs during the winter, and at the same time, and then conversely, cooling needs during the summer. So this could be even a step further in this whole big exercise to also support these countries that have these dual needs in the future. So this would be all from my side, and over to you, Libby. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anderson. It's true that sometimes we have debated about having a cooling and heating coalition instead of just the cool coalition. So your point is a good one, actually. Thank you for your presentation. We're now going to go to the panel. We are running a bit late, as everyone has guessed. Just to let you know what we plan to do. We plan to take this panel on until the end of the meeting, which is at 4 p.m. Bangkok time. And then we will ask those speakers who can do so to stay, to be able to take questions with other interested participants who wish to stay after the workshop officially closes, because I see that there's still about 100 people that are with us, and we can understand that there is quite some interest in this topic. So now with that, I will pass the floor to Mark Lister, who will introduce and moderate the panel on scaling up and financing national cooling action plans and their implementation. Mark, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Lily, and yeah, thank you for inviting me along to this meeting hosted by the Cool Coalition and NCAP. We have only a few minutes left, as you know, but we have an important topic to still cover, which is the question maybe on the mind of many of you, which is how to finance both the effort of developing NCAPs that you've been introduced to today with the new methodology, and also the projects that might flow from these additional plans, and thinking about how to structure that, how to link it with some of the things that we just heard from Xiaofeng and Anderson about linking those with national plans and commitments in other areas. So looking at NCAPs as a pathway to funding, both in terms of climate funding at the national level and then project funding in implementation. And I'm really pleased to say, and thanks for waiting, to our panel who've been with us a long time. A special nod to Johannes, who is spending most of his night with us tonight out of Washington, DC. But thanks very much. We've got a great panel of people with different perspectives on this question. And I'm going to start without any further ado with Sabin Basniat from the Green Climate Fund. And just to talk a little bit, maybe we only have about 5 minutes each to go through these points. And maybe I would also echo what Lily said, to encourage you to type your questions in the chat as we go to make sure that we can try and address them. But maybe, Sabin, just give us a couple of minutes about what the GCF's doing in cooling, talking a little bit about maybe how you see this process of lining up with national plans and NDCs, and how you can see NCAPs playing a role in shaping investment priorities in cooling as well from the GCF perspective. So please go ahead, just a few minutes of your perspective.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. And it's been a very good workshop so far. Learning, hearing a lot from the countries, and then also the different NCAPs that are coming in. For us at the GCF, cooling is part of our energy efficiency strategy, and this has also been incorporated into our updated strategic plan for 2020-2023, as well as one of the sectors that we will be dealing with in the GCF. From the way we look at cooling, I mean, the GCF is a financial organization when we have multitude of financial mechanisms that we use, from grants to loans to guarantees, to really kind of get the climate action happening. And then we see that the cooling has that opportunity. We feel that the cooling is one sector where we can use all sorts of financing mechanisms, business opportunities, business plans, models to really enact a much more cooler atmosphere around the world. So for us, I mean, when we finance projects, for us, there's three modes of financing in the GCF. One is what we call our readiness, which we provide to the governments. It's $1 million per year. The second is our project preparation facility to help project developers, really kind of develop the project into a really good climate project. And the third is our funding proposals. This is our bulk, bread and butter of what we do. And then, right as of today, we have about more than $8 billion of project that are financed, in the portfolio. That's for everything, and it's growing. And then I think that our board is happening now, where we're going to add another $500 million into our portfolio as well. But having said that, I mean, I think where for us on the cooling is we really want to target our readiness and our funding proposals. On the readiness is about really getting our countries ready for climate finance, and then really kind of building up their capacity as well as their project pipeline on climate finance. And we see the NCAPs as a really great vehicle to help the countries start thinking about how do they transition into a more efficient cooling world. I mean, the examples that we saw from India, from Cambodia, from Vietnam, where they're really thinking about how to align their cooling needs. I mean, this is what our readiness is all about, is to really kind of use our readiness funds to develop those things better, come up with concept notes, and then really kind of have a couple of key areas where they can actually develop those concept notes, and then based on that, working with different partners, our accredited entities, as Anderson also said, UNDP, UNEP, World Bank, ADB, and then to really kind of, and other national entities that are there to start making those projects happen. And then so one of the key things that we're really looking at for cooling projects is we have a cooling project that hopefully will be coming soon. Is not just saying okay, there's innovations in cooling in terms of the technology. I think we're looking at HFC free cooling, but at the same time we also need to figure out how do we make the business of cooling happen as well. So we're looking at technology as well as business. So we're looking at different cooling modalities, ESCOs, super ESCOs, cooling as a service, cooling hubs, cooling based funds. So and then incorporating all of that, and then that is all incorporated into our more enabling environment, and then setting the policies and the regulations in place, putting in minimum energy performance standards and all this, so that really kind of embodies everything together. So for us, it's a complete package. We're really looking to really serve the cooling world with investments. So we do have money available. So please, to all of the countries in Asia Pacific that are in the call, you all have access to our readiness funds. Please, apply for them. And then for all our AEs in the call, we are looking for new projects, new innovations in both, like I said, in the technology as well as in business. So in the business models as well. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and we're ready to finance. I think I will end there. Mark, I think that's about 5 minutes.
Fantastic, Seven. Thank you so much, and thanks for your enthusiasm for the subject. Thanks to the Green Climate Fund for your your commitment to cooling, and there's a call out there to, I think, everybody on this call to get in touch and look more at what plans they have and get in contact. So that's a terrific call to action. I think we've seen from the presentations from governments today, and also talking about some of the other issues in terms of implementing the NCAPs, that it's a very cross-sectoral and very multidisciplinary area. We know it is, people working in cooling. So this question of mainstreaming cooling into processes is very much at the heart of doing the NCAP work, and then looking at how to integrate that into other plans. This question of mainstreaming is important for financiers too, and I'm going to ask Johannes maybe to go next, who's the Senior Environmental Specialist in Sustainable Cooling and very involved in this topic, and really doing some leading work on the World Bank's roadmap for prioritizing cooling. So Johannes, if you can give us a few minutes maybe on your perspectives and how it looks from the World Bank side. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mark. I'm really pleased to see how the business of national cooling action plans is taking off here. Only a few years ago, cooling was nowhere in the World Bank. This has rapidly changed. Not long ago, we did a roadmap on sustainable cooling, and that identified national cooling action plans as an important tool in this readiness decade towards the Paris goal in 2050. So we are well on the road. I would like to address your question in 4 parts. Strategy, knowledge, operations, and financing. On the strategy level, there's quite some interesting development. We've just released the second climate action plan, World Bank's second climate action plan, which in fact refers a lot to energy efficiency in buildings, vehicles, infrastructure, technology, and also mentions, interestingly, cold chains. It targets, for all World Bank operations to be Paris aligned by July 2023. Together with this comes a new instrument, climate change and development reports. Those reports help countries to understand their development prospects within the climate change contexts. And that is actually an interesting instrument that a couple of countries may want to use to align their national cooling action plans with implementation support from organizations such as the World Bank. There are 4 countries in East Asia that are doing this already next fiscal year. It's China, India, Philippines, and Vietnam, and they're all working on cooling action plans. That then will feed into our country partnership framework and sector strategies and so forth. So there's a direct link into operations. On this level of knowledge, SMAP has released 2 publications on space cooling and cool cities. We have, through SMAP, a program that supports technical assistance and project preparation together with KSAP. In India, we are currently doing, actually interesting in this context, an implementation study for the India Cooling Action Plan. And the colleagues there have explained to me that this plan will be part of the South Asia and India Climate Action Plan for the World Bank. So again, you see how this feeds over into implementation. On the level of operations, we are still somewhat in the preparation phase. But there are some interesting aspects here. IFC has a program to transfer technology called Tech Emerge. There's the Old Edge program, which is looking much more into cooling efficiency now. We work on HCFC phase down and the linkages with Kigali and energy efficiency and HFC. Then there are some projects like smart cities that look at cooling with GF support. And in our transport sector as well, and vaccines, talks a lot about cooling. As you know, we are participating in the COVAX facility. Finally, I'd like to talk quickly about finance, because that's probably very, very important for you all. I'd like to first point out that actually cooling is one of these areas where climate action can be profitable. I mean, cold chains, energy efficiency, all these ideas can and developments can generate returns. So, you know, one way is, of course, to support these activities through our lending operations. But apart from this, we are working on a sustainable cooling facility that would help support such projects. Then there are also opportunities to climate finance and the regular energy efficiency financing line. What we do not yet know is how the MLF will position itself vis-a-vis energy efficiency finance. So that's something we are still awaiting, and then probably can contribute to this combination of HFC and energy efficiency in a measured way as well, since we are one of the MLF implementing agencies. I'd like to stop here. Thank you.
Johannes, it's clearly unfair to try to cover all of the things the World Bank is doing in sustainable cooling in 5 minutes. You know, you've touched on too many things there for us to actually to cover in detail. But I hope it sparks some questions and ideas from the audience, and that they may get in touch later. Please do keep those questions coming in the chat if you have them. So that we can record them. I realized I didn't actually introduce myself at the start of this, just in the rush to get through things. But just quickly, my company, Asia Clean Energy Partners, is a advisory company in the Asia Pacific. We have a couple of involvements with cooling funded by KSAP. So one is to look after the private finance advisory network, and that's you know, an interesting piece of work looking at the private side of finance as well. We don't have time to cover it today, but the other thing to mention is that I am working in conjunction with the Cool Coalition Secretariat, helping with some ideas on this idea of mainstreaming funding, where World Bank has taken such a leadership position. So working with another KSAP funded partner, E3G, and bringing together a dialogue between the multilateral development banks to think about this question of how to actually bring cooling to the fore, I should say, you know, in operations that Johannes is mentioning, and also helping to think about how we can bring more resources to the sector under the aegis of the Cool Coalition more generally. But anyway, with any further ado, we're going to hear from Daniela Schmidt, who's an energy specialist at the Asian Development Bank, so another one of our multilateral development banks, so active in the region and taking a leadership position in this. And Daniela, I think you've got a few minutes to tell us a little bit about a project that you're doing, which is a model which could be of interest to countries in developing their NCAPs and then the implementation that comes after. So maybe just a few minutes, Daniela, on that. Thanks.
Yes, indeed. So I hope to quickly inspire you with an approach and also a new business model, which you could then potentially bring either to us, the World Bank, or the Green Climate Fund for financing. So please stay tuned. So just to say, basically households in Asia will buy 680 million air conditioners in the next 10 years. But here's the thing, 7 out of 10 could be very inefficient. So 7 out of 10 households choose air conditioners that consume 42% more electricity compared to those efficient models that are actually already in the market. So and why is that? Many households basically can either not afford or do not want to buy efficient air conditioners because they cost twice as much. So meaning here that even though if you can save electricity over the lifetime of the product, and households might be aware of that, what is really relevant and matters is what can household pay for it today. So for example, we made also some calculations what kind of problem that could represent. So in the case of Thailand, we calculated that in the next 10 years, if households continue to buy inefficient air conditioners, the country would require 15,500 gigawatt hours of electricity more every year just for inefficient cooling of residential buildings. That means 6% more electricity every year just for inefficient cooling of residential buildings. So, and we have to think here about it, of course, what does it mean in terms of like, where could that electricity be coming from? How expensive would that electricity be? Could it be supplied from renewable energy sources? If not, for example, again, in case of Thailand, we calculated if it's coming from natural gas power, that could mean that 7.5 million tons in carbon dioxide emissions every year just because of inefficient cooling of residential buildings. We have to think about the cost of building that infrastructure to supply the electricity. We have to think about that this is potentially very expensive to build, operate, maintain the infrastructure for this kind of capacity, because it's capacity that can be used only for short periods during peak hours. So what we have been doing over the past months is to work with the power utility, actually in Thailand, to see if we can find a solution basically for households to be able to cover that higher upfront cost and to make efficient cooling accessible and affordable. So, and basically what we started doing is to look at energy efficient models that are already available around the world, but all of them have certain limitations. And then we started looking actually at telecom companies. So now you might wonder, why telecom companies? Because telecom companies have been very successful or are very successful in selling smartphones, the latest technology, to millions of customers. So basically, affordability, willingness to pay is not so much an issue, right? So how are they doing that? They use data, they use digital platforms, and they use effective payment plans. So we started to think, could a power utility do the same, but for efficient cooling? Because power utilities already serve millions of customers. So they could leverage that relationship to also provide efficient cooling services. Power utilities also have a huge amount of historic data points, for example, about monthly electricity consumption, electricity bill payments, geographic locations. So they could use that data to profile customers, to offer them then the best product. And they could also use the data actually to then, as a proxy, for example, to assess creditworthiness. And that brings me then to the next point. Could power utilities also provide on-bill payment services? Of course they can, and that could help, for example, households to get a credit to cover the higher upfront cost, and then we pay that credit over time through the electricity bill. And power utilities could, of course, also build digital platforms to offer then a streamlined one-stop shop service to customers to access affordable and efficient air conditioners. So what we did then over the past months as well is we started to build further on that idea. We collected a lot of data. We also did surveys among 4,000 households to come up with a solution. And the solution is basically for the utility to offer a digital service to households to purchase the most efficient air conditioners at the price of an inefficient one. So let me see if I can quickly share with you my screen so that I can basically show you how it will work. So I trust you can see my screen. So basically how it would work.
We're gonna have to move through this in just a couple of minutes, Daniela, because we're already at time. So
almost done. So basically how it works is a customer will access the platform, the digital platform, through a website or an application. The customer will tell the platform what they are looking for. So for what kind of room, for example, they would like to buy an air conditioner, they provide the size of the room. They also provide the number of people that are occupying the room and for how many hours they plan to use the air conditioner. Then the platform would recommend basically some options that exactly match the customer needs. And the customer will choose an option. The information would be directly submitted to the manufacturer. The manufacturer will then ship the product to the installer who will deliver and install the product at the customer's place. Via the digital platform, the customer will also get a credit from a bank to basically cover the higher upfront cost of the efficient air conditioner. And then the customer can use the electricity savings from using the efficient air conditioner instead of an inefficient one to repay the credit over time. And basically, we did all the calculations in very detail. It works. For households, basically, it is feasible to buy an efficient air conditioner at the price of an inefficient one and then use the electricity savings, even less than the electricity savings, as you can see here, to repay then the credit over time. And of course, for the utility, sorry, let me just quickly end the share. For the utility, it's also a viable model. Viability is very important. The utility can even make a profit, which is important then, of course, also for the scalability. And of course, what is very important, the utility can save cost by basically shaving peak demand and contribute substantially to carbon dioxide emission reductions. So in essence, here, just to quickly conclude, if you're interested to see if that could be something for your country, if that could be something for your utility, reach out to us. We will be happy to see how we can assist you to also look at the feasibility in your country with your utility. And to summarize again, when you prepare your national actions plan, I think it's very important here not to forget who will be the end user. Get the utility involved, and yes, think about business models like, for example, the one I just presented to you to make it happen. So that's it from my side.
Great, thank you, Daniela, and yeah, an interesting and relevant model, I think, for many people to take a look at. And utility is obviously a big part of the picture. Thinking about how to actually implement NCAP recommendations and take it beyond just a plan to some actionable sort of business models that could be financed and be investable. So thank you very much We are a little bit over time, but we have one more speaker, last but not least, Dr. Zulfikar Yonaidi. He's from the ASEAN Center for Energy. Just a few minutes from you. Thank you for waiting right to the end. Please let us know your perspective on this, the questions of national planning for this, how in your view it's linking to finance. Obviously, ASEAN Center for Energy very involved in this work, including developing regional roadmaps for buildings and space cooling, as well as being a core partner to so many around the region, including NCAP and including the Cool Coalition. So please, just a few minutes on your perspective, Dr. Yonaidi.
Right. Thank you very much. I'll try to make it brief. So as introduced, our institution, the ASEAN Center for Energy, we actually represents the energy sector in the 10 ASEAN member states. Some of those already presented their NCAP also in this workshop. And I think we, as mentioned, our countries actually have like various conditions. That's why the national condition will be very important in the development of the NCAP. But as a region, we are united and also guided by what we call the ASEAN Plan of Actions on Energy Cooperations, which is currently in the second phase of 2021 to 2025. And among this APAEC, we have one specific program area, which is the energy efficiency and conservation. And the 10 ASEAN member states, we, as mentioned before, guided by a regional target, which is to reduce the energy intensity by 32% by 2025, and also encourage the ENC activities, especially in industry and transportation. So what I would like to bring is how we can synchronize these national actions into regional actions in an effort to accelerate knowledge sharing, as well as knowledge practices, and also international cooperation, so that we can really accelerate the implementation of the NCAP. So within the program area of energy efficiency and conservation, in the APAEC, we have five outcome-based strategies. One of those is specific on the standard and labeling. We have also another one specific in the energy efficiency in building. And as mentioned by Mark, we are currently having several activities in regional level, but also in several countries level that are related to the cooling. One of which are we had previous works related to the ASEAN Shine, and then we are currently having a project together with the JAIF, and also supported by the 10 ASEAN member states on the promotion of higher efficient air conditioners in ASEAN, which is through harmonization of standard, but also strengthening market verification and enforcement capabilities. So it includes harmonization of testing standards and testing laboratories as well. And we also have another activities related to the product registration system, which is a very important component. And we try to come up with this regional one in which we gather information from the national product registration system. And we also provided with a general framework for for countries that still don't have the regional, their own product registration system, but want to develop them. And last but not least, we are currently implementing a sustainable building and cooling roadmap together with the International Energy Agency, or IEA. And specific for the sustainable cooling roadmap, we try to consider like various things, various aspects. On regulations, we have the maps, the harmonization standards, MV&E, of course, will be very important in information on the labeling, on the HAPS endorsement of the higher energy performance standards, informations, the registration system, but also most importantly on the incentives. So I think the ideas that we have and gathered in today's workshop will be very important for our regional sustainable cooling roadmap. The business model previously mentioned by Daniela will be very interesting, but we also would like to look through various incentives, grants, loan programs, bulk purchasing, manufacturing, and other. And just those kind of input will be very important. And last but not least, I would like to share as well that previously we also have what we call this lightning regional roadmap in 2019, and then in 2020, 2021, we developed what we call the national lighting roadmap, which is the derivation of that regional lighting roadmap. So I think the similar case can be done as well for the cooling appliances, especially the air conditioning. And probably we can also see whether the current NCAP that currently available can be inputted to the regional. And then once we have the regional, we can help in accelerating countries who still have not their own NCAP, but want to build them based on the best practices in the region. So I think I would like to invite all stakeholders in here to join us in developing this sustainable cooling roadmap, and further to have this knowledge sharing best practices to help each ASEAN member states in developing and implementing their own NCAP. I think I will stop there. Thank you very much, Mark.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Yunodi, and thank you for your regional leadership on these issues as well. I think we're completely out of time, unfortunately, so there's no doubt a lot of material that that sits behind everything you've said. As for all of our panelists, actually, we've only had a short amount of time and we are over time, so we need to wrap it up. But some really interesting and relevant information there that you've tabled. I'd really encourage everybody to get in touch and get involved a bit more with some of the things you've heard about here. Unfortunately, there's no more time for questions or anything more from me. But thank you all for sticking with us. Apologies that we're a little bit over. I'm going to hand back to Lily and the Cool Coalition team to wrap up. Thanks, Lily.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all the panelists for this interesting panel. So I will be wrapping up together with my co-host, Ksenia from UN NCAP. I think, as we've heard today, national cooling action plans are really an effective tool to tackle the cooling challenge. We've heard that they, can really help countries identify gaps in cooling access, study present and future trends, and see what actions can be taken to address these gaps in a sustainable manner. We've also heard today that NCAPs are really developed based on very tight collaboration between a vast range of stakeholders from different sectors. And this is really fundamental because, as we all know, cooling is a cross-cutting issue. And NCAPs help countries address these issues in a manner that is cohesive and avoids the silos that we see often in the sector. And of course, we heard that NCAPs can also help opportunities to incorporate efficient cooling in enhanced NDCs and serve as a basis for climate finance. So I think, without summarizing the discussion, very interesting discussion from countries today, we want to say that we recognize and celebrate these efforts that are being taken in this region and globally on developing NCAPs from countries such as those we heard from today, including India, China, we know Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Cambodia, as well as, of course, those who didn't present but are also developing NCAP in the region, such as Bangladesh and Philippines. We also recognize the work of the international stakeholders and experts that are here supporting countries in this process, including those we heard from today as well, such as of course, my colleagues from UN NCAP, UNEP, UNDP, SE4All, World Bank Group, AEEE, and the MDBs we just heard from. I think much more work is needed to ensure that our need for cooling works with our planet and not against it. And we're hopeful that the holistic methodology that was developed within the framework of the Cool Coalition, together with UN NCAP and all the partners we just mentioned, will help countries and implementers develop effective and comprehensive NCAPs. So with that, I would like to then pass on to, one more thing to mention is that, we will be, we had 400 people registered, as I mentioned, for this event. We had 70 countries participating, so even beyond those in Asia Pacific. We still have over 100 guests with us, so I think there's clearly a lot of interest, and we plan to take forward this interest in the other regions. So there will be workshops and capacity building workshops planned around the launch of this methodology in the Middle East and Latin America and Caribbean, which will be led by our colleagues at UNDP in the frame of the Cool Coalition, as well as one in Africa that will be led by our UNEP U4E colleagues in collaboration with Cool Coalition. So there will be much more time to continue these discussions. I'd like to hand over to you now, Ksenia, my colleague in this effort.
Thank you very much, Lily, and for such a comprehensive overview of such a long workshop. And it's long because, as we heard, the cooling issue is so comprehensive. We just touched upon some of the key issues, but there is, of course, so much more. We had very engaging discussion, breakout sessions, just discussing how comprehensive and challenging the data collection is for NCAP, and it's a crucial step, and how important collaboration and technical support from both international and national and local actors in this process. So I would like just to join Lily in the key messages, but also thank all the participants and all the countries who are already undertaking actions on National Cooling Action Plan development, and those who are just embarking on this journey. NCAP is really happy to be part of Cool Coalition. It's a great community with a lot of expertise, and we really did our best to build upon this collective expertise of so many partners, many of whom joined us today, to build this methodology. And methodology is available for any country to use. We made it as flexible and as adaptable as possible, and would really happy to see other countries picking it up, taking it further, and making cooling sustainable in their respective locations. NCAP will be collaborating with other regional commissions to let the member states know that it's available, and we'll be happy to support other countries to undertake this very interesting but challenging project. I would like also to thank Energy Foundation China for support for NCAP to undertake this work, and of course all the countries whom we're working with. So thank you very much for everyone staying until the very end. It was a very interesting day. Thank you all. Lily, back to you.
Yes, so that was the official closing, and just to say to you that all the PowerPoints will be shared, and a summary of the day will be shared with all participants. And now, so we'd like to thank all of you, and happy to sign off now. However, as I mentioned, many have stayed until the end and have said that they would like to possibly stay to ask a few questions. So while we release everybody, there is still an option for those of you who would like to stay for a few more minutes to discuss any urgent issues or ask any questions from our from some of the experts that are with us today. Please feel free to do so by raising your hand or saying something in the chat. Sorry, go ahead, Ksenia, you wanted to.
Yeah, Lily, thank you. Just before we let everyone go, there is a link in the chat for evaluation form. We would really appreciate your feedback on this event so that we can improve it further, and invite you to join other events which are upcoming. So if you could follow the link and answer a very quick survey, we would really much appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, well, if I don't see any questions in the chat, then I think we've run full steam today, as Ksenia said, over time. So with that, then we will just close the workshop and indeed make one last call to all of the country representatives that are listening in today to be the actors of change on cooling. You're perfectly placed to kickstart and lead the development of NCAP in your countries, and Cool Coalition members stand ready to support your efforts. So together we hope we can make the planet cool. So thank you, and stay in touch. Bye-bye.